Season 1, Episode 10, How to Learn Spanish with Duolingo, an episode in English. ¿Qué onda, amigos? Welcome to Season 1 of the Latino Fluency Podcast, the very best way to improve your Spanish listening and speaking skills through real, authentic conversation. I'm your host, Levi Flint. Aprendí mi español en Mexico, but I'm a native English speaker from the United States. I made this podcast to be an immersive language experience. So, if you're serious about becoming fluent in Latin American Spanish, this podcast is for you. If you like this podcast and are passionate about becoming fluent, I have built something awesome for you. Go to latinofluency.com and become a podcast member today. As a member, you will have access to an episode transcript, vocabulary flashcards, pronunciation practice, grammar notes, and a discussion forum for every episode. ¿Estás listo? Let's get started with today's episode. What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Latino Fluency Podcast. My name is Levi, and I'm actually here today just by myself, wanting to discuss in English a very important topic, in my opinion, and that is Duolingo. How to use it to learn Spanish and to move towards a more intermediate and even beyond level of fluency in Spanish. So I think this really warrants its own podcast episode just because of the popularity with Duolingo and the number of people who ask me because they know that I'm a Spanish speaker, they know I've lived in Latin America, they know I did a master's degree in teaching Spanish as a second language. And so naturally people come to me asking me like, hey, is Duolingo a good app? Or, hey, can I get fluent from Duolingo? It's almost kind of like replaced the old Rosetta Stone question of, hey, Rosetta Stone, is that a legit way to learn Spanish or to learn a language? Can I use Rosetta Stone to become fluent in Spanish? That used to be the question, and I've realized that it's now Duolingo has taken its place. Because, in my opinion, I don't have a negative opinion of Duolingo at all. I personally have used it for learning French, and I'm using it right now to improve and strengthen my Portuguese. So I definitely think it's good. I think it has a lot of great qualities. It's free. And now Duolingo has really expanded, especially with Spanish. You have multiple ways to use it. And so I thought that this would be a great topic for a podcast episode here in season 1, and a great way maybe even to just take a break from Spanish conversations for those of you who are just wanting another way to study Spanish outside of the podcast, or maybe if you're a beginner and you are here for the first time and you just saw this episode and thought it looked interesting, this could be for you guys as well. So we're talking about how to use Duolingo to learn Spanish. Okay, so let's start with the first way that you can use Duolingo to learn Spanish. And I talk about this topic a tiny bit in a previous episode focused on how to learn Spanish using your smartphone, but I thought I could go a little bit more into depth here. So the very first way to use or to learn Spanish with Duolingo is the standard Duolingo course that is basically set up in different skills sections. So you have a certain skill set. Let's say it's words like greetings in Spanish, or food in Spanish, or clothes in Spanish, things like that. And then it progressively gets more complex as you move down the line to more complicated verb conjugations, prepositions, all sorts of different structures, and you have to basically do a lot of matching and a lot of translation and things like that. So I really think that it's a great tool because it is just so easily accessible. You can jump on your desktop and do it, and then pick right up where you left off on your smartphone, and vice versa. It's also free, and they also are doing a lot of work. into the app to constantly improve the user interface of it, the user experience of it. So I think it's great. Even the pronunciation has improved enormously from where it was a few years ago. So I think it's absolutely worth keeping in your arsenal and using it, ideally even every day, as a way to just kind of keep going down the line of the standard course to develop your skill with vocabulary and pronunciation and sentence structure and grammar rules and stuff like that. So one way that you can use this standard Duolingo course is to set daily minimums for the amount of experience points that you're going to get. So you can very easily set that either on the desktop or on the smartphone app. I really recommend this because it'll hold you accountable. And the second thing, this takes us to the second thing with the standard course, is that it encourages you to keep a streak alive. And this is great. It's fantastic to be able to keep a streak, start a streak, and then be really intent on just keeping it going. This is so important because it really drills the habit and the reality of learning a language, which is you really gotta be using it on a daily basis. If you don't, I really think that it's hard to realistically achieve any level of fluency without using it on a daily basis, kind of almost obsessively, if I'm being really honest. As funny as that sounds. But I think the setting a daily minimum in terms of amount of studying that you're going to do, and also trying to keep a streak alive where you are studying every day without breaking that habit. So the standard course is excellent, and that is the first way. The second way that you can use Duolingo is through Duolingo Stories. Duolingo Stories is a new feature that they added, I want to say a year, but possibly 2 years ago. Now, the stories, as of right now, here in March 2019, they cannot be accessed through the Duolingo smartphone app, Android or iOS, iPhone. So I hope they change this in the future. I really believe they will. But right now, the easiest way to do it is simply on the desktop app, so Duolingo.com. It's super easy just to access it, click stories, and you have access to a multitude of, actually like multiple levels as well, like 15 levels of different stories read by native speakers. And they're really actually entertaining. They're original stories. They always involve more than one person. So you have different dialogues and stuff like that, people talking to one another. And the voices are actually native speakers. So you can hear the story, go along with the story, and also practice reading it out loud in your own best accent, mimicking the characters of the story. And there are also like fill in the blank, matching, etc. within the story. So it keeps you really engaged. And also, the stories can be accessed just through a browser on your smartphone as well. So Chrome or Safari or whatever you're using, you can simply go or just Google Duolingo Stories or duolingo.com/stories, I believe, and that will pull it up. And I've done it before on my smartphone. It works really well. But I still prefer the desktop for that particular feature, but you can totally do it and benefit from it enormously. The third thing is Tiny Cards. Tiny Cards is an app either for the iOS, smartphone, Android, or your desktop. This was created by Duolingo at least 2 years ago. And this basically is a way to study and to review using flashcards for the Duolingo standard course, the one I mentioned as number 1. And also you can study Duolingo Stories vocabulary with tiny cards. So every time you complete a story, it unlocks on your account, it will unlock a new set of vocabulary flashcards that correlate with that story. So this is an awesome feature. So like right now I'm studying Portuguese and I finished a story, and there's so many of them, and I immediately go and I review the tiny cards, and you can have that on the go as well. So this is just a hell of a tool. I really recommend it. And using the Duolingo standard course, the stories and tiny cards all together, it's just a really nice thing to have, and it's free. And the fourth and final way to use Duolingo as of right now, at this point in time, here in 2019, is the Duolingo Spanish Podcast. Now, Latino Fluency is also a Spanish podcast, and in my opinion, a vastly superior podcast, if I might say. But the reason I think Latino Fluency Podcast is so great is because it is a very natural, free-flowing, informal conversation. And if you become a member, you have access to a lot of support materials that go along with this podcast when I'm having Spanish conversations. So I think just kind of throwing yourself to the wolves in a way with a real conversation is one of the best things that you can do. However, with that being said, the Duolingo podcast is made really with beginners in mind. So I think that using this, or at least trying it out, is worth it if you guys are podcast lovers. And if you're listening to this podcast, you very well may be. So I think that the Duolingo podcast, it's interesting. They use a lot of English, so they're basically also telling a story. They use a lot of English to kind of get the listener up to speed with what the context of the story is. And then they will have a few lines in Spanish. And then they come back to English to tell more of the story. And then they jump back into Spanish for a little bit. So it is this like really bilingual, almost like Spanglish type of experience. For me personally, I found it to be distracting. I think for other people, however, it could be just what you're looking for. If you are more of a beginner, it might be something that you want to do the Duolingo Spanish podcast, and then progress to my podcast, to the Latino Fluency podcast that is definitely more intermediate and advanced. So that's how you use Duolingo. It's pretty straightforward, but I get this question a lot, so I think it'd be great, or I thought it would be great, to create an episode here and to just have it here in season 1, and ideally helping a lot of people who have the similar questions that I have received in the past about Duolingo, and is it legit for learning a language? Is it a waste of time? And ultimately, you guys know my opinion now. I think it has some excellent features. It's free. I think it should totally be a part of your toolkit for learning Spanish, and you can absolutely learn a lot. However, only relying on it is a complete waste of time, in my opinion. Complete mistake. So use Duolingo as a tool, and I mentioned 4 ways you can use it, but use it just as a tool. Immersion is always going to be, there's no replacement for immersion, I should say. So immersion, listening immersion, and also when you have the opportunities, engaging in a lot of conversation and speaking is fundamental to becoming fluent in Spanish. Thank you guys so much for listening. Hasta el próximo episodio. Nos vemos pronto. Adiós. Amigos, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Latino Fluency Podcast. Just a reminder, if you are serious about becoming fluent in Latino Spanish and want to support this show, go to latinofluency.com and become a podcast member today. You will get access to a transcript, vocabulary flashcards, grammar notes, pronunciation practice, and a discussion forum for every episode. I work hard to give you exactly what you need to understand every conversation and to also improve your listening and speaking fluency with every episode. Thanks again for listening. Hasta el próximo episodio.